something I've been really proud of is that we haven't shied away from facing into the tough conversations and knowing that it's not that people don't want to have the conversation, they just don't know how to approach
Wow.
it. And
Mm.
as a result, they do nothing. And actually, it's caregivers that need this support.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change.
Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. How do we create workplaces where caregiving and career success go hand in hand? Too often, working parents, especially mothers, are forced to choose between professional growth and family life. And for many women, that choice comes at a cost. A career that stalls, opportunities that disappear, a confidence gap that grows wider with every missed promotion, every unconscious bias, every workplace structure that wasn't built with caregiving in mind. In today's episode, I'm joined by Jodi Geddes, co-founder of Circle In, a platform dedicated to supporting caregivers and working parents at every stage of their journey. Jodi's story is one of resilience, determination, and a deep belief that no one should have to sacrifice their career to be a great parent. She shares what it is like to build a startup while on parental leave, the challenges parents, particularly mothers, still face in the workplace, and why burnout is becoming an epidemic amongst caregivers. This conversation is a wake-up call for leaders. It's no longer enough to just offer flexible work arrangements or parental leave policies on paper. Real leadership means actively creating a culture where returning mothers are set up for success, not sidelined. Jodi makes a compelling case for why businesses need to do better. Because when we fail to support parents, we lose exceptional talent, we reinforce outdated gender roles, and we create workplaces that push people to breaking point. She shares some powerful insights into how organisations can make the transition back to work smoother, from meaningful parental leave policies to practical return to work support that acknowledges the mental load and identity shift that comes with becoming a parent. And perhaps most importantly, we talk about why leaders themselves need to set the tone. Because when those at the top normalize work-life balance, establish healthy boundaries, and create workplaces where caregiving isn't seen as a career setback, it changes everything. This conversation is real and honest and a must listen for any leader who wants to build a workplace where people don't have to choose between their careers and their families. Well, hello, Jodi. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. Very excited to have you on the podcast. Very topical conversation we're about to have. How are you?
Oh, look, I'm great and excited to be here. Always love talking about caregiving and showing more empathy in the workplace.
Oh, okay. So let's just start first up by saying that you were the co-founder of Circle In. And for those who don't know what Circle In does, could you maybe give us a bit more insight into that?
Sure. The first time I've heard "were the co-founder" feels quite funny.
I know.
You're right. I still guess I am the co-founder. We sold the company in November of last year. So really proud to have built the business over 8 years. And essentially Circle In is and still is to this day a caregiving platform that supports caregivers, working parents, most all employees through every stage of caregiving and life stage through digital resources, manager support. So if we think about, from planning a baby right through to returning to work, menopause, or caring for a loved one, Circle In is really there to support you in those times of need. And over the 8 years, we had an incredible journey. I loved being a tech startup founder. And we went on to support over 100 global organizations. But yes, we did sell it in November, and I've had a beautiful long break because I also suffered burnout. And I'm sure we'll get into that at some point during the podcast. So it's great to be back and now moving into my next chapter.
Well, congratulations on the sale. That's always exciting when you are able to let the baby go and hopefully grow even more, isn't it?
It's funny you say that. We often feel like it's turned into a teenager.
Yeah.
And, it's time to move on, and I'm not having another baby. I'm not starting another company, but I'm excited about my next chapter and doing more on my own and spending more time with my children.
What made you or inspired you to start up Circle In?
Yeah, great question. It was actually through my own journey of having children. So my kids are now 9 and 11, which gives you a sense of, the idea, and then obviously 8 years in the business. And that sense of going off to have a child and feeling really disconnected, lack of manager support, imposter syndrome, all of the things that we talk about, and a real need to better support both caregivers or parents, and also provide greater support to organizations to better manage the process. So that's where the idea started. Really, really grateful for the experience and the incredible people and companies that we've been able to support. And, I really admire those companies that worked with us, because they're genuinely the ones that are walking the talk and want to create a caring environment for their employees.
How long after you had babies did you start Circle In?
I actually started while I was on parental leave.
I was just going to, most women do this. We start
Yeah.
businesses while we're on leave.
We had the idea we would spend one day a week, my business partner and I. My mother would look after our children, and we really spent that year kind of in ideation, kind of thinking about, what we'd like to do. Went back to work, and then it was at that point that I really saw the need was real. And then from there, it was probably about 18 months after that. But, we were really grateful that, on launch day, we had 5,500 visitors to our website, and it just grew from there. We just knew we had touched on something that, women in particular genuinely needed and wanted.
Talk to me about the product that Circle In provides, which is an engagement platform for employers to provide to their community of working parents. How does it, because you're in 100 organizations globally, how does it work? How does an organization engage with that?
Yeah, sure. So it's essentially a standalone platform or website. So it's often offered as an employee benefit to all staff. So it's a digital platform that, employees at any time can log into. There's automated emails to help you through specific journey stages, whether that's going on parental leave or returning to work. As a manager, you can log in at any time and access, need to know resources, one pages on how to have better conversations, supporting someone through menopause, things that people don't know how to approach. And I think that's something I've been really proud of, is that we haven't, shied away from, facing into the tough conversations and knowing that it's not that people don't want to have the conversation. They just don't know how to approach it. And as a result, they do nothing. And actually, it's caregivers that need this support. And I know we're going to talk about that today in terms of it's only becoming more and more important. We bring our whole selves to work. We don't leave our life at the revolving doors or the front doors of walking into work, and I know that even through our research, at the time I was at Circle In, 90% of managers now feel like they're part-time psychologists, dealing with all of the personal issues that, people are bringing to work. So it's never, ever been more important to be what I call a whole leader, someone that is not only leading, but they're also there caring for themselves and caring for others.
Because, having a family, and you've written about this in an article that you published, I think it was in Women's Agenda, where you talk about having a career and having a family aren't mutually exclusive, but quite often they are seen as being exclusive. Talk to me more about that, because it's a balance, isn't it, between I want to have a family, but I also want to have a career. I'm going to have a career break, but I want to, still thrive in what I see as my future, investment in my future. How do we close the gap in some of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I truly believe they're not mutually exclusive. Like, we all have families. We are all caregivers in some shape or form. And I think what we've really seen, especially over the last few years, and COVID has fast-tracked this, is that the organizations that are going to win are those that are creating an environment where people can be a parent and be, a professional worker. As I said, you're bringing your whole self to work. They're not mutually exclusive anymore. So I think it's those companies that are going to win, that are creating an environment, that are embracing working parents, that are creating an environment where, it's okay to leave at 3 o'clock for child pickup because you have flexible working hours. And we'll talk about some strategies there. But there are so many things that you can do to create environment. And on the flip side, I've heard of many companies that aren't family friendly. Unfortunately, they're going to lose out because there's been a real power shift, and the power has now shifted from employers to employees, become very evident. And it's employees that are demanding, the right working environment. And from my perspective, a big component is that they want a family-friendly workplace.
It's so important now, isn't it, Jodi? And I'm, without giving too much away, I'm seeing this personally play out just in my own environment, where we have an issue with childcare places in Australia right now, where, there are so many young mothers who are having babies and putting their names down, or the kids' names down, in 2, 3, 4 childcare centres, and they're just not getting in. So I hate to think the amount of money we are losing in the economy because women are just not being able to come back to work. Then you have the conundrum of, well, if I don't find childcare, do I have grandparent support? And we don't all have that can actually look after the child if I go back to work 1, 2, 3 days a week. Lots of statements there and questions, but let's start with, how do we potentially fix the childcare issue? Because that's kind of the underlying base of some of the problems that we're having right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a much bigger question than I think I can answer around fixing the childcare issue. You're right, there is a lack of childcare. I think the worst thing that can happen, and the thing that I'm passionate about and have spent a lot of time, is actually, I hear a lot of women say, well, if I do get my kids into childcare, or I have to get a nanny or whatever, it's actually going to cost me more than going back to work. Therefore, it's not worth my time.
It's not worth it.
Actually, that's the worst thing you can do, because the number of women I've spoken to that go down that path, and then 5 years later, when their kids are starting school, decide that they want to re-enter the workforce, and they're in a position now where I've lost my confidence. I don't know what I'm going to do. So yes, childcare is a big issue. And I think, I know there's a lot of amazing people out there advocating and working on, how do we fix that? Is it a cost issue? Is it a demand? Like, we need more childcare centres. I know there's some amazing organisations that have childcare built in, within the 4 walls of their company. Kudos to them. Like, they're the companies you want to work for, that are really creating an environment that is family friendly. But I think for anyone listening that is at that position in life where they're starting to weigh up, is it worth my while to go back? My answer is, please consider it, because whilst it may feel like the easy option now, in 5 years, you will regret it.
You will regret. It's almost looking at it as an investment in yourself.
100%.
To keep you connected to the other half of you, which is equally as important as being a mother.
100%. We are people too. And I know that you change when you have a child, and there is imposter syndrome and all of that. But it's important to stay, to stay to who you are and be your own person and brand. And so, yeah, I think that's really important.
Talk to me about going back in. We're talking about, going back into work, whether it's half part-time or full-time. But then we also have the keeping in touch days that people often talk about. Talk to me, how is that supposed to work from an employee's perspective?
Yeah, so I think Australia's best kept secret, the keeping in touch days. It's something we've spoken a lot about. So employees are entitled to up to 10 keeping in touch days during their parental leave. And essentially what that is designed for is for employees to be able to go in and stay connected with their team, meet with their manager, attend a team day, attend a work lunch. They're not designed to go back in and physically work, be, front facing or client facing or whatever it may be. It's exactly what it is, to keep in touch with your team members, because the hardest thing we know is that when you have 12 months off, it's very easy to become disconnected, lose your confidence. So the idea of these days is to keep you connected so that your return to work is actually easier, and it benefits the business as well, because, you you ramp back much faster than, if you have been disconnected and you spend those first few months really questioning who you are and where you fit back into the organization.
And what happens if the organization wants you to do more than just keeping in touch? They actually want you to become client facing and, fly around the country, meeting people, meeting clients. What do you do then?
Yeah, so I always say to people, Fair Work have an incredible website that really outline, your rights as an employee. I think the first step is to go there and make sure you really understand and are clear on what your company's asking for versus what the days are actually designed for. To me, that sounds like something that I would definitely be questioning. And then Fair Work have a hotline, speak to them and get some advice, because definitely they're designed to stay connected, not to be physically working.
You often talk about empathy in leadership, and I think that's really needed when women go off and have babies and come back in the workforce. Because you go off and have babies and there's all this excitement about this new world and you have all these ideas about how it's going to perfectly work for you, and of course none of it actually happens. But then coming back, you have the guilt, right? The guilt syndrome that is a gift that just keeps on giving for the rest of your life in motherhood around, you've gone back to work. So how can leaders create a more empathetic culture in their organization for mums coming back into the organization?
Yeah, the role of a caregiver is never the same. So if you think about a parent, they're all going to have different needs. Everyone's got a different journey. And I think, it's really interesting because you think about all the invisible battles that are at work every single day, whether, a parent, someone might be listening to this and within their team of 20, they might have someone who has a sick child, another caregiver might have a parent with dementia. They themselves might have their own mental health struggles. Life doesn't stop when you walk into the office. Yet too often, I think we expect people to leave their struggles at the door and, be professional and power through. So I think it's really important that managers are really showing up and showing that true empathy and going beyond just asking, oh, how are you? Actually going a little bit deeper, because how often do you get oh, I'm fine, when actually they're anything
not.
but, and I think parents are huge at that. So it's about really recognizing when someone needs you, and they're drowning, how do you throw them a lifeline? So I think when we talk about empathy, for me, it's about active listening and really listening without judgment, not giving advice, truly listening and showing empathy. And I think for working parents, that's what we need. How often do we need just a manager to listen, to actually empathize with the situation we're going through? For me, I have an autistic daughter, and I know that sometimes I can show up in the morning and I'm not great because I've had a really bad morning. So for me, it's about, being honest with my team about where I'm at, letting them know that, I've had a bad morning, again, being vulnerable. Let your team know that, it's okay not to be okay. So again, role modeling comes into it. So empathy is a huge, big, piece that we can talk about. And there's lots of ways that leaders can show empathy. We've got active listening, being vulnerable, role modeling, all of these pieces. And essentially what it's all laddering up to is creating a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah.
We want all of our employees to feel like they can speak up, that they can be heard without any judgment.
In terms of the hybrid world of work, which, we're all moving towards now, and I quite often hear leaders say this statement is you can't be at home with little children. I can see the positioning that the director or the business owner is taking, and I can see the positioning coming from the mother, which is, I can work when the kid is asleep. I've got grandparents who are around the house looking after them. They go to childcare for a couple of hours, but I need to be at home because it gives me the contact time that I need, or I might still be breastfeeding or whatever that looks like. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's definitely one of the huge positives out of COVID. I think working parents have really won, I think, through COVID, because flexibility is now the norm. And actually, it's not a perk anymore. It's expected. And again, I talk about how there's been a shift in power, and I really feel like it's moved from employers to employees. Employees are now demanding, more flexible environments. They're demanding that they set, certain work hours or whatever it may be. So again, in terms of creating an environment that can support parents. To your example, I've seen lots of different ways that companies are approaching this, and there's no right or wrong. And unfortunately, there's no silver bullet.
Yeah.
It's essentially what works for your company. And I think, some of the things that I've seen really work well are scheduled core hours, letting employees choose their start and end times outside of the window. So I know for us, at Circle Inn, our core hours were 10 to 3. Employees had to be online during those hours. I didn't care if someone worked 10 till 7 or someone worked 7 till 3 or whatever the hours were. But 10 to 3 is when we scheduled, our meetings and so forth. I think the other is, and this is a huge mindset shift, and I know a lot of companies are getting there, but it's really moving to a results-driven culture. Don't track hours, focus on
track
outcomes.
The results. Yeah, it's such good advice.
Share the stories with employees. I'm a huge advocate for storytelling. I believe storytelling drives cultural change. So it might be in the Monday whip, reflecting on one employee who might have delivered all of their work by Friday lunchtime last week and they finished early. Create a culture where people are actually understanding what results driven means as opposed to hours. There's nothing worse than people sitting there feeling like they have to, stay online till 5 o'clock, even though they're not doing anything. If you've got your work done, great. So really moving to an outcome. But I think, if you're going to move to this, what is super important is that you have clear objectives. And it is my biggest learning, is that if you're going to move to results driven, people need to be really clear on what's expected, what their role is, when things need to be delivered. The more you can set them up for success, especially if they're at home on their own. There may be some days where they don't talk to anybody. So you want to make sure they're being efficient and productive in that time and working on the right things. And it's only then that you're going to get the right outputs. So yeah, I think it is a difficult one, and there is no silver bullet, but there's lots of companies doing amazing things here, and they're just two areas that I've seen work really well.
What else can leaders do to make sure that their employees feel valued and engaged, throughout this career journey of theirs?
Yeah, look, I think, again, it comes back to, for me, I talk about the whole leader, and I talk about, we've got leaders that have incredible leadership skills, but they also need to have the caregiving skills. How do you create, an environment where they're caring for themselves and they're caring for others? And that's really important now. No longer are the days of, that control and demand kind of culture, that hierarchical, you've got leaders at the top telling you what to do. It's about leaders actually who are showing real empathy and creating a psychologically safe environment for their employees. Going beyond in terms of, the act of listening, showing up when people need you most. It's in those moments that, people do need their leaders.
That's when they connect with you and know that you really care about them.
100%, show vulnerability. It's the best thing you can do. There's no doubt that every leader has been through or is going through a challenging situation. Share it with your team. You don't need to share all the details, but that builds trust, and that then enables your own team to open up. And that's where the magic happens. So again, I come back to, people I think get scared of the term empathy and psychological safety. At its core, it's showing care to yourself and looking after yourself and making sure that you're role modeling the right behaviors to your own team. If you're sending an email at 8 o'clock at night, is that the right behavior? Because it trickles down. So schedule your emails and send them at 9, the next morning. So think about how you're showing up, but also how you're showing up for your team and how you're showing them care, and especially in those key moments. Start a team meeting with, an opening question around, how people are feeling. Can we do a out of 5 or a happy face or give me an emoji? Just start to get the team to open up. But again, I really use storytelling as a way to drive that.
You mentioned burnout to me earlier. A lot of parents often face burnout, don't they? Sleepless nights, planning to go back to work, finding care, all that stress, they go back into the workplace and they get burnt out very, very quickly. How can leaders proactively address this in the work environment?
Yeah, burnout is very real and it's a hot topic. I think we've never seen more burnout than we're seeing right now. I experienced it twice last year. So for me, and I'm happy to share, my experience, but it was mid last year that I actually just reached breaking point and I broke down, and I've never cried or felt the way I did. It was awful. I had to take 2 weeks off work. And I think the biggest thing I learned is that I was scared about coming back. Sure, I was the founder and, I knew that I had a great leadership team, but I was scared about what they were thinking and what they were saying, because burnout does get into your head. You start to kind of question everything and who you are and why you can't actually cope. So when I came back again, I think about my leadership style and being very authentic, and I'm not afraid to be vulnerable. So I leant in and I actually shared this story with my team and really talked to them about, what I faced, what I was feeling. And it was interesting because through doing that, I almost gained more respect and support. And from there, my recovery was incredible, because all of a sudden I had people around me that were supporting me. They were checking in daily. They were making sure I was okay, that I wasn't, going over and above where I needed to. So again, that's my personal experience. And I encourage anyone listening that is going through burnout to not be afraid to share your story, because I promise you that so many others are either going through it or have been through it. So again, sharing that story. I think in terms of simple tips, I mentioned about the role modeling, and, you set the culture as a leader in your organization. So if you're setting a culture that you expect people to work past, whether it's 5 or 6, that's the culture you're building, and that will lead to burnout. If people see a leader sending emails late at night or on weekends, you follow your leaders. So before you know it, they will be, mirroring your behaviors. And I think that's, going to lead to stress and exhaustion and ultimately burnout. So really setting boundaries is critical to burnout. So when I came back, I was very clear about, my hours at work. I really tried to block my lunch, and I would really encourage everyone to think about, can they set boundaries as a team? It's a great team exercise to actually sit down and talk about, whether it's their core hours, whatever it may be, what do boundaries look like for the team? And I think, to also have a culture where, as a leader, it's your job to look out for your team, but how do peers look out for one another? And there's nothing more incredible than when a peer can actually recognize the signs of another peer and call that out. And I've seen that happen a few times when someone will come and say, hey, I just want to let you know that I've recognized that Tom over here, I don't think they're coping. That to me is the true definition of a psychologically safe environment, where people feel they can speak up, not only about themselves, but about others. They're genuinely showing care for one another. So I think, really it comes down to role modeling, setting those boundaries, and creating that right culture where people feel they can speak up.
Thank you for sharing that, because it's important for people to hear, because burnout comes in so many different forms, and quite often we don't recognize it as a start until we're so far down that rabbit hole, and then we realize, like you said, you burst into tears and you couldn't stop, and quite often we get to that point before we realize that we are burnt out. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think we do need to talk more about it. And again, I would say there is no clear definition of burnout. It's a little bit like what I said about parents or caregivers. Everyone has a different journey. So for me, how burnout shows up for me would be different to yourself. For me, I just go into this awful kind of situation where I can't get out of bed. I can't stop sleeping. I'm crying. I withdraw from the world. I've heard others know they're getting to burnout phase when they stop reading, because reading is like their thing they do every single night. When they start to tune out from that, that's a sign that actually they're pulling back from things that they love. So again, it's really thinking about, have certain behaviors changed for you that are having a negative impact on you as a person, and trying to address it before it gets too bad. Because once you're in that situation, it's not impossible to come back, but it's just going to take you a little bit longer.
I want to shift gears a little bit. What are your thoughts on the backlash that we're seeing out of the US, both when it comes to their DEI policies and hybrid working?
Oh, this is a big question. And it's funny, I've been having a lot of conversations with people, over the past few weeks, and there's a lot of talk about this. I had a interesting conversation with one company in particular who have pulled all of their policies only a few days ago. And there's no doubt that there's lots of companies out there pulling their strategies, but I really believe it's the forward-thinking organizations that recognize that inclusivity and flexibility are not just nice to have. It is essential to attracting and retaining top talent. They are the ones that will win. And I think, reflecting on the last few years, and I'm so intrigued, I think, for us in 10 or 20 years to look back at this period of 2020 to 2025, because so much has happened. I feel like a lot of companies rush to adopt DEI initiatives, post 2020, without integrating them deeply into their culture. So, they quickly pulled together a strategy and felt they ticked that box because everyone was doing it. And they're probably, and rightly so, skeptical if they haven't seen the results. And as a result now, they're, quickly pulling strategy, oh, that hasn't worked. So I think the smartest companies will continue to invest in DEI, not because of the optics or because it drives business success, but they know that it truly does drive business outcomes. And they don't see it as a tick the box. They know and understand the business case. So I think they're going to be the ones that win. I also think there's a lot of companies that are confused and maybe don't understand the why behind the strategy. So I see this, and again, it comes back to storytelling. It's an opportunity for leaders and companies to own these decisions, but tell the story, communicate the why behind DEI, why it matters to the organization, what they're trying to achieve, because I think it's a word that people get scared by. They're like, what does it actually mean? So I think it comes back to, really owning that strategy, staying true to it, and articulating it to employees. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think my concern out of all of this is, as it comes out of the US, the Australian marketplace, things what's happening in the US, it's okay for us to actually remove some of this from our organizations as well. And it doesn't mean that it's right because the US is doing it, doesn't mean that we have to do it too. In fact, we should be the opposite, proving how well it works when you do have the flexibility and the, initiatives, the DEI initiatives in the workplace.
But, it's like anything in life. Do you want to be a follower or a leader?
Yeah.
And if you want to be a follower and that's how you operate, that's your decision. If you want to be a leader, own it, communicate it, and stay true to it. And it's those companies that will win and see the results, because there is a business case for DEI.
Yeah.
It is important and it is critical, but it has to be done right.
Yeah. So what are some of your tips for mums who are returning back to work, because the sleepless nights are not going to change for a while? What are some of your tips around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that parents face when they're going back to work is this, imposter syndrome, self-identity crisis. I'll talk openly here because in some ways I'm going through the same thing right now. I've sold my business after 8 years, and I'm now sitting here feeling like I did when I returned from parental leave. Who am I now? Do I fit here? My life has changed. I've been through something that has been life-changing. So I think one of the strategies and things that I'm trying to do right now is being kind to myself, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, it's not an easy process to return to work. So be kind to yourself, leverage the support networks within your workplace. One of the best things, or one of the things that I actually did, was I created my own mothers group at work. I managed to find 8 women who returned at a similar time to me, and we met once a month. And it wasn't to talk about our babies. It wasn't to moan about work. It was actually to support one another with some of the challenges, the things that were in our head, that we weren't good enough. Can I do this role anymore? I feel guilty that I'm leaving at 5 when others are here till 5:30. All of the stories that we're telling ourselves in our heads. So that to me was the most powerful thing that I did. So I often encourage anyone going back, if you can find some like-minded, or even, find someone who's a few years ahead of you. Can they be a little mentor, have a coffee. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. So ask for help from your peers, but also ask for help from your manager. Your manager is not a mind reader. And I often say, you know, when you go off on parental leave, their decision is not to communicate with you or not to check in because they don't want to annoy you. They actually think that this is your time. They're not a mind reader. So unless they know what your needs are, how are they meant to deliver on that? So again, when you're heading off on parental leave, let your manager know if you want to hear from work. Do you want the check-ins? When you're coming back to work, let them know what support you need. You know, really create that open dialogue, that trust between them. And again, you know, if we flip the conversation to a manager perspective, you also need to create that environment where people feel like, you know, they can speak up. You don't have any bias. You know, what a mother is telling you and their decision may be very different to the decision you made. And that's okay. So really pull back any bias that you may have. So yeah, there's a lot there, but it's really asking for help, being kind to yourself, and getting the stories out of your head, because you are good enough and you're amazing. And in deep down, the person hasn't changed from when you had a baby. You are still there.
The same person.
You are still brilliant. You just have to find that confidence again.
I think also remember that you've got to survive and thrive. Otherwise, there's no point in going back to work, right? If you're just going to survive. So you've got to survive and thrive at the same time. And you've just got to put the right things and people and processes around you to make sure that you do that.
And that first year is tricky. Like, I've never had more illness in my life, more sick days. And there is so much guilt there. Guilt is a terrible thing.
It's a gift that keeps on giving, as I say.
100% is. So again, just know that first year, you've just got to get through it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you get to our stage where, you know, they're older, and then you're going through all the next lot of problems, teenagers.
It never changes.
Whatever it may be.
It never changes.
No, it really doesn't.
So looking ahead, what's next in your journey? You've sold Circle In. You know, I know you're taking some time out. You've just returned back into the sort of, what am I going to do next? What can you share with us? What's next in your journey?
Yes, I'm really genuinely excited for my next chapter. I feel the best is yet to come. So, you know, I've got 25 years experience now across corporate and startup, and I feel like I'm in a really unique position to have that experience on both sides. So I've decided to work on my own under my name, Jodi Geddes. So I'm really looking to pursue two angles. And the first, and what I'm most passionate about, is keynote speaking. I have an incredible keynote centered around a personal crisis that I faced with my family, and how this kind of life-changing event has shaped my leadership approach and really redefined my understanding and approach to care in the workplace. And we've spoken a lot today about the importance of caring for yourself, caring for others. So I'm really big on storytelling, and I'm really excited to be pursuing the keynote speaking path. And I've already got a few lined up, which is super exciting. And the other is consulting and working with amazing brands to really help shape their brand growth. I know what it takes to build a strong and effective communication strategy, and I really want to use that to tell more stories, to be real, to be authentic. And because I've said it today, but storytelling drives cultural change. And I think that's what every organization needs and wants more of. So I'd love to work with amazing brands that, you know, want to tell more stories and drive that real change.
Jodi, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and good luck with everything that you're doing next. And hopefully you'll still be able to advocate and make change in the space that we've been talking about, you know, around mums coming back to work and organisations actually creating family-friendly environments.
Oh, 100%. You know, I've been doing a lot of work on my own personal brand, and, you know, I'm big on having, you know, what are my key kind of content thought leadership pillars. And I will never move away from supporting working parents. It's, you know, what started Circle In, and yes, I have sold it, but I'm still very passionate, and I feel like I've got a big role to play there in advocating for greater support and care in the workplace. So I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network.
If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.